Lawrence Frost stepped out of the shower, shook a few drops of water from his shoulders, and carefully smoothed his thinning hair at his temples. It was 6:30 in the morning. It had rained during the night, and the fresh smell of wet grass and damp asphalt wafted through the bedroom window. Beatrice was still asleep, her face buried in the pillow and covered with a blanket. She had been coming home late lately. The latest meetings of the initiative group to protect the city park from development were taking up all her evenings. Lawrence got dressed quietly, trying not to wake his wife. The reflection in the mirror was that of a 45-year-old man of average height, with a slight paunch that was still successfully concealed by a well-tailored shirt and wrinkles around his eyes. He was not handsome, but he was not ugly either, just an ordinary middle-aged man, the owner of a thriving business. Descending to the first floor of their two-story house in the prestigious Oakwood Heights neighborhood, Lawrence habitually turned on the coffee maker. It was his morning ritual to drink a cup of coffee in the empty kitchen while the house was still asleep. It was the only half hour of complete peace and quiet he would have all day. He and Miles had been running a successful industrial equipment manufacturing business for over 10 years. They had started out in a tiny space in a former shop on the outskirts of town, but now they owned a 6-story building in an industrial park, had over 30 employees and orders from all over the East Coast. Lawrence took a sip of coffee. Maybe he should take a walk before work? Go outside, get some fresh air. But the thought disappeared as quickly as it had come. Lately, he rarely wanted to spend time at home. It was easier to leave early and stay late at the office. Everything there was simple and straightforward: orders, deliveries, meetings. He didn't have to think about how his wife and children had become strangers to him. The refrigerator door was covered with colorful flyers calling for the protection of the ocean, the saving of whales, and voting for some activist in the upcoming city council elections. Beatrice had never been interested in politics before, but 2 years ago she suddenly started attending meetings of a local environmental group, and then she seemed to have been replaced. Now their house was full of brochures, badges, and posters, and instead of quiet family dinners, there were endless conversations about global warming, toxic masculinity, and systemic inequality. Lawrence vaguely remembered when they had last made love, maybe 3 months ago, or 4. Beatrice had grown distant, and he couldn't find the strength to fight for their relationship. Eliza shuffled into the kitchen in her slippers. At 16, she was already a carbon copy of her mother. Same hazel eyes, same jawline, same stubborn streak. Only her hair had recently been dyed ash purple, and she had a small silver ring in her eyebrow. "Hi," she muttered without looking at her father. "Good morning, sunshine," Lawrence smiled. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep." Eliza took a box of cereal from the cupboard and poured it into a bowl. "I have a migraine. Again? Maybe you should see a doctor." "We already went to the doctor, Dad." Her voice sounded irritated. "You never listen. Dr. Peterson said it's stress and hormones." Lawrence wanted to respond, but remained silent. All their conversations lately ended the same way, with irritation on her part and a feeling of helplessness on his. They had once been so close. He had taught her to ride a bike, taken her to the amusement park, read her bedtime stories. Now Eliza looked at him like a stranger who had invaded her territory. He finished his coffee and put the cup in the dishwasher. "Tell Mom I might be late tonight. We have a meeting with some potential investors." "Okay." Eliza nodded indifferently, scrolling through her phone. Lawrence went upstairs to check on his son before leaving. Ethan's door was closed. Lawrence knocked softly, but there was no answer. He cautiously opened the door. The room smelled sour, a mixture of unwashed bodies, old food, and something else Lawrence preferred not to identify. Ethan was lying on his bed, buried in his game console. The curtains were drawn and the room was lit only by the TV screen. "Ethan, I'm leaving for work." "Uh-huh," his son muttered without looking up from the game. Are you going to college today? Ethan shrugged. Maybe. Lawrence sighed. His relationship with his son had always been difficult. Ethan was a sensitive child who preferred books and computer games to football and baseball. Lawrence had tried to find common ground with him, but all his attempts had failed. In the last 2 years, the situation had only gotten worse. His son spent more and more time in his room or with questionable friends, neglected his studies, and started skipping classes. Recently, Lawrence found bags of pills in his room and tried to talk to him, but the conversation escalated into shouting and slamming doors. "Could you clean up your room before you leave?" Lawrence asked, trying to keep his voice neutral and non-judgmental. "Mom says it's my personal space and I can keep it however I want," Ethan replied, without looking up from his game. "Of course it's your space, but could you at least take the plates out? They're starting to smell." Ethan paused the game and turned to his father. "Listen, I'm not 15 years old. I'll take care of my plates myself, okay?" "Okay," Lawrence agreed, feeling tiredness creeping in. It was only 7 in the morning and he was already tired of his family. He and Beatrice had once had big plans. They had met in college and married right after graduation. The twins were born 3 years later. Lawrence remembered well how he had held the tiny newborns in his arms, how he had been overwhelmed with pride and responsibility. Back then, the future had seemed so bright and promising. What had gone wrong? When did they lose touch with each other? Maybe when he became so absorbed in developing his business that he spent less time at home, or when Beatrice decided that being a housewife was demeaning for a modern woman. Perhaps they had simply outgrown their relationship, like children outgrow old clothes. Lawrence went downstairs, grabbed his briefcase and car keys. On the kitchen table was a stack of flyers, Beatrice's latest initiative. Say no to toxic masculinity. Stepping outside, he took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. The day promised to be warm and sunny. The neighbors across the street had already decorated their front lawns with Christmas lights, even though the holidays were still almost 2 months away. Their neighborhood had always been like that. Neat houses, trimmed lawns, everything perfectly manicured. "I wonder how many people like me live on this street," Lawrence thought as he got into his car. How many men put on a mask of well-being every morning and drive to work, leaving behind families who don't understand or appreciate them? The drive to the office took about 20 minutes. Lawrence turned on the radio, but turned it off almost immediately. He wanted silence, a chance to be alone with his thoughts. He and Miles' company, Frost Hayes Industries, occupied a modern building with mirrored windows in the business district. Lawrence parked in his usual spot near the entrance. It was only 8 in the morning, but Miles was already there. His silver Audi was parked nearby. "Early bird, as always," Lawrence smiled as he entered his partner's office. Miles Hayes, a tall, balding man with piercing blue eyes, looked up from his laptop and stood up to greet his friend. "Trying to sort through these reports for the investors." "Coffee?" "No, thanks. I already had some at home." Miles was one of the few people Lawrence felt comfortable with. They had known each other since college, started their business together, overcome difficulties together, and celebrated successes together. Miles was single and devoted all his energy to his work. "How's the family?" Miles asked, returning to his desk. "Fine," Lawrence replied mechanically, although they both knew that wasn't true. He didn't like sharing details of his family life, even with his best friend. It felt like a kind of betrayal. "Is Beatrice still involved in activism?" "Yes, saving the world in the evenings," Lawrence tried to joke, but it came out too forced. Miles nodded understandingly. "Listen, maybe you should talk to a family therapist? Janet really helped my sister and her husband when they were going through a crisis." "It's not that bad," Lawrence lied. "It's just a phase. Teenagers, you know." Miles didn't press the issue. He knew when to stop. "Okay." Let's get down to business. Did you see the offer from Northwest Systems? They want to sign a contract with us for next year. Lawrence was relieved to dive back into his work routine. Here, in the office, he felt confident. Here, he knew exactly what to do, how to solve problems, how to get results. No uncertainty, no emotional pitfalls. The day flew by. Meetings, phone calls, negotiations with suppliers, lunch with a potential client. Lawrence deliberately prolonged his working day, inventing additional tasks for himself. The clock on the wall showed almost 9 in the evening when he finally turned off his computer and got ready to leave. On his way home, he stopped at a 24-hour supermarket and bought a bottle of whiskey. Every day it became more difficult for him to return to his beautiful home and his beautiful family. It was like playing Happy Families, except that all the players knew it was just a game and no one was enjoying it. The house greeted him with silence. The light was on in the hallway and the TV was on in the living room, but no one was there. There was a note on the kitchen table, written in Beatrice's neat handwriting. "Dinner is in the fridge. Eliza and I are at a meeting. Ethan is at a friend's house." Lawrence opened the refrigerator, but he didn't feel like eating. He took out a glass, poured himself some whiskey, and went out to the backyard. The night was cool, and stars were visible in the sky. He sat down in an old rocking chair they had once bought at a garage sale and took a sip. Somewhere in the house across the street, a child began to cry. Then a woman's voice could be heard soothing the baby. It was an ordinary life, an ordinary evening in an ordinary American town, where beautiful facades hid a variety of stories. Lawrence finished his whiskey and returned to the house. Loud music was playing in Ethan's room, which meant his son was already home. But Lawrence didn't knock on his door. He simply went up to his room, undressed, and lay down in his empty bed. Beatrice returned after midnight. He heard her quietly enter the bedroom, change in the bathroom, then carefully slip under the covers, trying not to wake him. Lawrence pretended to be asleep. He wasn't ready for a conversation or another argument. Tomorrow would be a new day, and everything would start all over again. He would go back to work, immerse himself in company affairs, solve other people's problems, and avoid his own. Such was his life, outwardly successful and prosperous, but inwardly empty and meaningless. And he saw no way out of this vicious circle. The Frost Haze Industries office was decorated for the Christmas party with the excess of glitter and tinsel that only corporate holidays bring. An artificial Christmas tree in the corner of the conference room sparkled with multicolored lights, and festive arrangements of fir branches and red candles adorned the tables. Outside, light snow was falling, adding to the evening's atmosphere of magic and coziness. Lawrence stood at the drinks table, sipping whiskey and watching his employees. Miles had insisted that this year they hold the party a week before Christmas so that employees could spend the holiday with their families. It was a wonderful idea, and Lawrence supported it, although he himself was not very enthusiastic about it. Beatrice had declined to attend the party, citing an important meeting of the initiative group. She had always accompanied her husband to corporate events, was the life of the party, charming everyone with her smile and wit. But that was a long time ago. Now she had other priorities. "Great party, Mr. Frost." Dexter Green, one of the new employees in the logistics department, approached him. He was a burly man in his mid-30s with tattoos on his neck and rough features. Lawrence had personally insisted on hiring him despite his criminal record. Dexter had served 3 years for drug possession, but after his release, he decided to turn his life around. He proved to be a hard worker and quickly earned the respect of his colleagues. "Thanks, Dexter. Are you having a good time?" "Sure I am." Dexter smiled broadly. "It's the best job I've ever had. By the way, Mr. Hayes said you approved my promotion. I'm very grateful for your trust. You've earned it." Lawrence smiled back. "How's your daughter?" "Thanks for asking. Athena started school this year. Her teacher says she's very bright. Dexter's eyes lit up with pride. The last 2 years have been tough for us, but things are looking up now. We recently moved into a new apartment, on your side of town, actually, on Meadow Street. Really? I live not far from there. Yes, we're almost neighbors now. Dexter took a sip of beer from his glass. I even saw your wife the other day. At the Hampton Inn. They have a nice cafe there. Athena and I sometimes go there on weekends. Lawrence frowned. The Hampton Inn? That's strange. I didn't know Beatrice went there. Well, maybe it wasn't her. Dexter suddenly hesitated, feeling awkward. No, it was definitely her. I remember it well because she was with that official from the city parking department. You know, the tall one with the mustache. Wesley Porter, I think. I know him because he gave me a ticket for parking in the wrong spot once. I remembered him right away. Lawrence felt something cold tighten in his chest. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. Dexter noticed the change in his boss's expression and became nervous. I mean, I'm sorry if I said something wrong. I just thought you knew. They're like business partners. Of course, Lawrence tried to smile. Beatrice works with the city council on park preservation. It was probably a business meeting. Yeah, probably, Dexter nodded with relief. Well, I'm going to go. Maggie from accounting is dancing. I'm going to try my luck. Dexter walked away, leaving Lawrence standing with his glass of whiskey, trying to make sense of what he had heard. Beatrice at a hotel with another man? Wasn't it enough that she had distanced herself from him, that they hardly spoke, that they slept on opposite sides of the bed? Was she having an affair? So many questions popped into his head that Lawrence felt dizzy. He wanted to get some air, but instead he headed to the bar and ordered another whiskey. Hey, are you okay? Miles appeared beside him, looking worriedly at his friend's face. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, Lawrence lied. Just tired. It's been a tough year. Yes, but a profitable one. Miles raised his glass. Our stock is up 20%. That's worth celebrating. Definitely. Lawrence clinked glasses with his friend, but he didn't feel festive. Memories were spinning in his head. Beatrice had been leaving the house a lot lately. Meetings, protests, lectures. Could some of these events be a cover for her meetings with this Porter? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, why? The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Lawrence kept up the conversation, congratulated his employees on the upcoming holidays, and even danced with Miles's secretary to Jingle Bells. But all his thoughts were occupied with his wife's alleged infidelity. When the party came to an end, Lawrence called a taxi, deciding not to drive after drinking. On the way home, he checked his phone for messages. One from Beatrice. I'm staying at Frankie's tonight. See you tomorrow. Frankie was her friend from her activist activities, or was that a lie too? The house was empty and quiet. Lawrence went up to his bedroom, sat down on the bed and buried his head in his hands. What should he do? Make a scene? Tell her everything that had been building up over the years? File for divorce? Pretend he didn't know anything? He opened his laptop and typed Wesley Porter's name into the search engine. A few links to the city website, a couple of mentions in the local newspaper, an ordinary middle-ranking municipal official. What could he have attracted Beatrice to? Lawrence went to his social media page. Porter was a pleasant-looking man in his 40s, with a neatly trimmed mustache and curly hair, athletic with an open smile. His marital status was listed as married. There were photos with a blonde woman, presumably his wife, and 2 teenage boys, a typical happy family. The thought that this man was sleeping with his wife made Lawrence's stomach churn. He slammed his laptop shut and went down to the kitchen. He poured himself another whiskey, drank it in one gulp, and poured another. An hour later, already quite drunk, he returned to his computer. He opened Beatrice's email. They had known each other's passwords since the days when they trusted each other. Lawrence wasn't sure if Beatrice had changed her password, but he decided to try. The old password still worked. There was nothing suspicious in her email, bills, newsletters from environmental groups, correspondence with colleagues about their activism. Nothing that could indicate an affair with Porter. Lawrence leaned back in his chair. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe it really was just a business meeting. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the case. Too many strange things had happened over the past few months. Too many excuses and evasions. He took another sip of whiskey and moved on to the messengers on her phone. Beatrice had synced them with her computer account, but she hardly ever used them, preferring text messages. He checked her call history. No unfamiliar numbers, just the usual contacts. Then he opened their joint phone bill. And that's where he found the clue. Beatrice regularly called the same number, but it wasn't in her contacts. After searching online, Lawrence discovered that it belonged to the Municipal Parking Authority, Porter's office. The calls lasted from 5 to 40 minutes. Some were during business hours, but many were late at night or early in the morning. They didn't seem like business calls. Lawrence felt a heaviness growing inside him. He didn't want to believe she was cheating on him, but the evidence was too clear. He decided to check Beatrice's calendar. She had always been an organized person and wrote down all her appointments and tasks. Sure enough, the calendar was filled with events. Group meeting, picket at City Hall, lecture on climate change. But there was something else. Regular meetings marked simply with the letter W, with no indication of place or time. Lawrence suspected that W stood for Wesley. The next such meeting was scheduled for 2 days later. Lawrence closed his laptop and lay down on the sofa, staring at the ceiling. What should he be feeling? Anger? Pain? Jealousy? He ran through his emotions like beads on a rosary, trying to figure out which one was strongest. To his surprise, the dominant feeling was relief. Now he knew for sure. Uncertainty was always worse than certainty, no matter how painful it was. He fell asleep right there on the couch and woke up in the morning to the sound of the front door opening. Beatrice was back. She looked tired but peaceful. Seeing her husband on the couch, she frowned slightly. "You're not at the office?" "It's Saturday," Lawrence reminded her, sitting down and rubbing his stiff neck. "How was the meeting?" "Fine," Beatrice said, taking off her coat and hanging it on a hook. "We worked out a plan for next month. You know the city council wants to sell part of the park for a shopping center, right?" "I didn't know," Lawrence replied honestly. He wasn't interested in the fate of the park. He was interested in the fate of their marriage. "Beatrice, we need to talk." "Not now, please," she shook her head wearily. "I haven't slept all night. I need to take a shower and get some rest." Lawrence wanted to insist, but changed his mind. Perhaps now was not the best time for a difficult conversation. He wasn't sure he could control his emotions. "Okay," he said, getting up from the sofa. "I'm going to the office. I have some things to take care of before the holidays." Beatrice nodded, clearly glad to avoid the conversation, and went upstairs. Lawrence quickly took a shower, got dressed, and left the house. He sat in his car for a while, looking at their house, a 2-story house with a beautiful garden and a white picket fence, the classic American dream. Behind that facade, there had once been happiness, but now there was only habit and mutual irritation. Instead of going to the office, Lawrence drove to the Hampton Inn. He had to see for himself, confirm his suspicions. Besides, he needed time to decide what to do next. The hotel was located in the city center, a typical 6-story building with a faceless facade. Lawrence parked in the parking lot across the street and just sat in his car, watching the entrance. He realized how ridiculous he looked, a grown man spying on his own wife like a teenager. After a couple of hours of pointless observation, he decided to go inside. A young woman with bright red hair and tattoos on her arms was on duty at the reception desk. "How can I help you?" She smiled politely. "Good afternoon." Lawrence tried to sound casual. "I'd like to inquire about the possibility of holding a business meeting at your hotel, something for 12 to 15 people." "Of course." The girl began to talk about conference rooms and catering. Lawrence listened half-heartedly, continuing to look around. Through the open door to the right of the reception desk, he could see a small cafe. Maybe Beatrice really did come here for a business meeting? "Do you host any events for non-profit organizations?" he asked. "My wife is part of a group that advocates for the city park, and they sometimes hold meetings here." "Oh, you mean Green Future?" the girl asked. "Yes, they come here. They usually rent the small conference room on Wednesdays. Very nice people, by the way." "Yes, Green Future," Lawrence nodded. "By the way, have you seen Beatrice Frost here? She's their leader." "Beatrice?" The girl thought for a moment. "I'm not sure. What does she look like?" "Dark brown hair, medium height, brown eyes," Lawrence described. "She's 42, but she looks younger." "Ah, I think I know her," the girl nodded. "She often comes here with Mr. Porter. They usually stay in room 412. Lawrence felt nausea rising in his throat. He was ready for his suspicions to be confirmed, but every new piece of evidence still hit him like a punch in the gut. "Mr. Porter from the city administration?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, that's him." The girl suddenly stopped, realizing she had said too much. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" "I'm her husband," Lawrence replied dryly. The girl's face showed embarrassment mixed with pity. "Oh, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "It's all right." Lawrence forced a smile. "Thanks for the information about the conference rooms. I'll be in touch if I decide to hold the meeting." He quickly left the hotel, got into his car, and drove off, not knowing where to go. After driving a few blocks, he pulled over to the side of the road, feeling his hands shake. He felt nauseous, and his temples throbbed. Beatrice had cheated on him. It was a fact, confirmed and unequivocal. What now? Go home and tell her everything? Pack his things and leave? File for divorce? Lawrence suddenly remembered his father's words from many years ago. Never make decisions in anger. He decided to follow this advice and take some time out to think about the situation. Half an hour later, calm enough to drive, he headed for the office. The empty building on a weekend was just what he needed. No conversations, no explanations, just the work routine to help him take his mind off things. After spending the whole day at the office, Lawrence returned home late in the evening. Beatrice was already asleep. The children were scattered around the house as usual. Eliza was hanging out with a friend, and Ethan was locked in his room, probably playing video games or doing something worse. A perfect family living under one roof, but each on their own. The next day, Sunday, Lawrence decided to continue his secret investigation. He had to find out everything before making any decisions. Setting his alarm for early in the morning, he got up while everyone was still asleep and drove back to the Hampton Inn. He parked in the same spot and waited. He had no idea if he would see Beatrice or Porter, but something compelled him to stay. After spending almost 3 hours in the parking lot, he was about to leave when he noticed a familiar figure. It was Wesley Porter walking toward his car. A few minutes later, Beatrice came out of the hotel, looked around, and quickly got into her car, which was parked in the far corner of the lot. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't kiss. They didn't even look at each other. It was a well-rehearsed routine for people who were used to hiding their relationship. Lawrence sat there, paralyzed, watching his wife drive away from their meeting place. Even now, seeing it with his own eyes, he could hardly believe what was happening. That evening, when the whole family was home, Lawrence sat in the living room pretending to watch a football game. Beatrice was busy in the kitchen preparing dinner. The children were each in their rooms. "Dinner's ready," Beatrice called after a while. Lawrence went to the kitchen and sat down at the table. Beatrice called the children, and to his surprise, they actually came downstairs. Perhaps they were attracted by the smell of lasagna, Beatrice's signature dish. "How was your day?" Beatrice asked, serving the food onto plates. "Fine," Lawrence shrugged. "I was at the office." "On Sunday?" Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "You're working too much." Lawrence struggled not to laugh at the bitter irony. She was worried that he was working too much while she was cheating on him. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to catch his wife's eye. "The usual," Beatrice shrugged, avoiding his eyes. "I was at Frankie's, discussing a new strategy for a public campaign." Lies. Lawrence looked at her and couldn't understand how she could lie to his face so easily. How much more was a lie? Their entire life together? "Okay," he said, digging his fork into the lasagna. "I'm glad you have hobbies." Beatrice smiled, taking it as a sign of peace, that he had accepted her story. Lawrence felt a strange satisfaction from this little deception. If she could lie to him, he could lie to her in return. After dinner, he went up to his study and turned on his laptop. He had to find out more about Wesley Porter and his family, and how long this affair had been going on. There was little information on social media. Porter was married to a woman named Veronica, owner of Porter Enterprises, a real estate agency. They had 2 teenage sons. They lived in the suburbs, in a house smaller than the Frosts, but in the same respectable neighborhood. Lawrence continued his search and found a newspaper article from 5 years ago. Wesley Porter had been appointed head of the city parking department after his predecessor was fired over a corruption scandal. In the article, Porter promised to clean up the department and restore the trust of the citizens. There were mentions on a local residents' forum that parking fees in the city center had risen by 30% under Porter, but nothing else of note. They could have met Beatrice through her activism. The city parking department was responsible for parking spaces around the park that Beatrice was fighting to preserve. Lawrence rubbed his eyes wearily. How long would it take to piece together all the details of this puzzle? Was it worth the effort? Was it worth fighting for a marriage that was clearly over? Or maybe he should consider a different approach. What if revenge would be sweeter than forgiveness or a breakup? The thought came to him suddenly, but Lawrence didn't dismiss it. Instead, he began to ponder various scenarios. He didn't have a clear plan yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to play the role of the cuckolded husband who either forgives the betrayal or makes a scene. No, he would find a way to repay the betrayal, and his revenge would be cold and calculated. In the meantime, he would pretend that he knew nothing. He would play the role of a busy husband who didn't notice what was going on right under his nose. This would give him time to gather more information and develop a plan. After all, if Beatrice had learned to lie so well, then so could he. For several days, Lawrence simply observed, gathered information, and analyzed. At the office, he was distracted, gave vague answers, and Miles even asked if everything was okay. Lawrence got away with the standard excuse about pre-holiday fatigue and being busy. At home, he behaved as usual, leaving early, returning late, and barely speaking to Beatrice. No one noticed any changes in him because outwardly nothing had changed. Only inside he was seething with a mixture of pain, anger, and, surprisingly, curiosity. He wanted to know all the details, all the facts to trace the entire chain of events that had led his family to ruin. On Wednesday, Lawrence decided to take action. He found the address of the real estate agency Porter Enterprises and went there, telling Miles that he had a meeting with a potential client. The agency was located in a small one-story building on Maple Street, not far from the city park. A glass door, a sign with a picture of a key and a house, several cars in the parking lot. A typical real estate agency, one of dozens in the city. Lawrence went inside and looked around. A young woman with a bright smile sat behind the reception desk. "Good afternoon. How can I help you? Good afternoon. Lawrence tried to look relaxed. I'd like to speak to Mrs. Porter. She was recommended to me as an excellent specialist. Of course, the girl nodded. How can I take your name? Lawrence Frost. The girl dialed an internal number and announced the visitor. A minute later, a woman in her 40s emerged from the hallway, a slender blonde with short hair and attentive gray eyes. She was dressed in a strict, dark blue suit that emphasized her good figure. Mr. Frost? She held out her hand. Veronica Porter. How can I help you? I need to talk to you. Lawrence shook her outstretched hand. Alone, if possible. Something in his tone or gaze made Veronica wary, but she kept her professional smile. Of course, let's go to my office. She led him down the hallway to a small but cozy office overlooking the parking lot. Beautiful photographs of houses and certificates confirming qualifications hung on the walls. On the desk was a framed photograph of Veronica, Wesley, and two teenage boys, all smiling against the backdrop of the sea. Have a seat, Veronica said, pointing to a chair across from her desk. So how can I help you? Are you looking for a new home or do you want to sell your current one? Lawrence sat down and just stared at the woman in front of him for a moment. What was he going to say? How could he explain the purpose of his visit? An awkward silence hung in the office for a few seconds. Mr. Frost? Veronica frowned slightly. Is everything all right? No, Lawrence replied honestly. No, it's not. I'm not here as a client. Then why are you here? Veronica's voice took on a wary tone. My wife's name is Beatrice Frost, Lawrence said slowly, watching his companion's reaction. Not a muscle moved in Veronica's face. Either the name meant nothing to her, or she was an excellent actress. And she's seeing your husband. They're having an affair. Veronica froze, her gaze hardening. She was silent for so long that Lawrence began to wonder if he had done the right thing in coming here. If this is some kind of joke, she finally said. No, it's not a joke, Lawrence shook his head. I found out about it by accident a week ago. I've been gathering information ever since. They meet at the Hampton Inn, room 412. I saw them there on Sunday morning. Veronica stood up, went to the door, and closed it. Then she returned to the table, sat down, and poured herself some water from the pitcher. Her hands were shaking slightly. Why did you come to me? She asked. Honestly? I don't know, Lawrence shrugged. It seemed right that you should know, and I guess I needed to talk to someone. Someone who understands. Veronica took a sip of water, then put the glass down on the table and looked Lawrence straight in the eye. What if I told you I already know? Now it was Lawrence's turn to be surprised. You know, I've suspected it for several months, Veronica smiled bitterly. Wesley started coming home late, had urgent meetings on weekends. New cologne, new underwear, classic signs. And you didn't do anything? What was I supposed to do? Veronica shrugged. Make a scene? File for divorce? We have children, a business, a house together. It's complicated. Lawrence nodded understandingly. The same thoughts were tormenting him. What are you going to do now? Veronica asked. I don't know, Lawrence replied honestly. Sometimes I just want to leave, to give up everything. Sometimes I want revenge. Most of the time, I just feel tired and empty. Veronica looked at him intently, as if assessing him. Then she opened a desk drawer, took out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. I think we could both use this, she said, pouring the whiskey, for a lousy day. They drank. Lawrence felt the alcohol burn his throat and then spread warmth throughout his body. The tension he had felt since entering the agency began to recede. How old are they? He asked, nodding at the photo. Daniel is 14. Thomas is 12, Veronica replied. And yours? Twins, Ethan and Eliza, they're 16. That's a tough age. Yes, especially given the circumstances. They fell silent. A strange sense of solidarity hung in the air. two people betrayed by those closest to them. "How long have you known?" Veronica asked, pouring more whiskey. "A week. One of my employees accidentally mentioned seeing my wife with your husband at a hotel. Then I started noticing signs that I had ignored before. Strange phone calls, messages, constant meetings, and sleepovers at a friend's house." "It was similar for me," Veronica nodded. "At first, it was just intuition. Then I accidentally saw a text message on his phone, and I started following him. It's a nasty feeling, isn't it?" "Disgusting," Lawrence agreed. "I never thought I'd be spying on my own wife." "You know what hurts the most?" Veronica took another sip. "That I was always a good wife. I supported him when he was unemployed, helped him build his career, raised our children, and took care of the house. And he—" She didn't finish her sentence, but Lawrence understood. The same feeling of injustice tormented him. "My wife," he began, but stopped. It felt strange to talk about Beatrice with a stranger. But then again, who else could understand him as well as Veronica? "She drifted away from me a few years ago," he continued. "At first, I thought it was just a phase, a midlife crisis. Then she got involved in activism, environmentalism, park preservation. I was happy that she had found new interests, but it turned out to be just an excuse." "Wesley had social activities too." Veronica made quotation marks in the air with her fingers. "How convenient, right? Covering up infidelity with noble goals." Lawrence nodded. The bitter irony of the situation did not escape him. "What do you plan to do next?" he asked. "I don't know," Veronica sighed. "I'm so angry that sometimes I just want to burn all my bridges. But then I think about the children, about the consequences. Divorce will be expensive and painful. Wesley will probably try to sue me for part of the business I built with my own hands." "My situation is similar," Lawrence agreed. "Besides, our children have already distanced themselves from us enough. A divorce could push them away for good." They had another drink. The conversation became more open, more personal. They shared stories about their family lives, recalled how they had met their spouses, how happy they had once been. "You know what's strange?" Veronica said after her third glass. "I'm not even sure I still love him. It's just that betrayal always hurts, whether you love someone or not." "I understand," Lawrence nodded. "Beatrice and I haven't been close for a long time. But realizing that you've been betrayed by someone you've lived with for 20 years, someone you have children with—" He didn't finish his sentence, but Veronica understood. "Would you like some more whiskey?" she asked. "No, thanks. I have to drive." Lawrence looked at his watch. "I'm already late." "Let's exchange phone numbers," Veronica suggested. "I think we both need someone to talk to about all this." They wrote down each other's numbers. When Lawrence was about to leave, Veronica suddenly stopped him. "Lawrence, have you ever thought about revenge?" He looked at her with interest. "I have. Have you?" "All the time," she smiled, and there was a cold determination in that smile. "If you decide to do something, let me know. Maybe we could join forces." Lawrence nodded. "Definitely." Leaving the agency, he felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a week, he didn't feel like screaming, crying, or drowning his sorrows in whiskey. Talking to Veronica had helped him realize that he wasn't alone in his situation. The next few days passed in relative calm. Lawrence continued his usual routine, but now he had an outlet: his evening phone calls with Veronica. They talked almost every day, discussing their feelings, sharing observations about their unfaithful spouses, and supporting each other. On Friday evening, when Beatrice had once again left for her activist meeting, Lawrence called Veronica. "Would you like to get a coffee? We need to talk." They met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, where they were unlikely to be recognized. Veronica looked tired but determined. "I've been thinking a lot about our situation," she said, stirring her cappuccino. "And I've come to the conclusion that just getting divorced is too easy. That's what they want us to do. Maybe even what they're hoping for." "What do you suggest?" Lawrence asked, looking at her intently. "Revenge," Veronica replied simply. "But not the usual kind, not hot and impulsive. Cold, calculated, well thought out, so they understand what it's like when someone you trust betrays you." Lawrence felt a chill run down his spine. There was something sinister yet appealing about Veronica's words. "Do you have a specific plan?" "Just a rough outline." Veronica leaned closer. "But I think we could use our professional skills. You're a businessman, I'm a real estate agent. We both know more about money, contracts, and legalities than they do." Lawrence thought about it. What Veronica was proposing was risky and could have serious consequences. But wasn't that what he wanted deep down? To make Beatrice feel the same pain he felt? "I'm listening," he said. "First, we need more information." Veronica took a notepad and pen out of her purse. "Financial situation, assets, documents. We need to know what we're working with." "I can provide all the information about our family," Lawrence nodded. "Accounts, loans, I have it all." "Excellent." Veronica made a note in her notebook. "Then we need to figure out how to take away what they value most. For Wesley, it's his reputation and career. And for your Beatrice?" Lawrence thought for a moment. "Comfort. Status. She's always been proud of our house, our cars, our position in society. And oddly enough, her role as a protector of nature. She likes being respected in those circles." "Good," Veronica continued, taking notes. "We can use all of that. But the main thing is that we have to be careful. No one must suspect that we know about their affair or that we are in contact with each other, at least not until the plan is ready." Lawrence nodded. "Agreed. I can continue to play the role of the unsuspecting husband. It's not that difficult considering that Beatrice is rarely home, and when she is, she hardly pays any attention to me." "Me neither," Veronica smiled crookedly. "Fortunately, Wesley is too preoccupied with your wife to notice my maneuvers." They continued discussing the details of the plan, writing down ideas, rejecting some options, and developing others. By the end of the evening, they had a rough outline of what they could do. "So, it's decided." Veronica snapped her notebook shut. "We're launching Operation Cold Revenge." "Sounds like the title of a spy movie," Lawrence grinned. "Maybe someday they'll make a movie about us," Veronica winked at him. "The story of how two betrayed spouses joined forces for the perfect revenge." They laughed, and Lawrence suddenly realized that he was laughing sincerely for the first time in a long time. There was something liberating about this strange alliance with Veronica, their shared secret and plans. When they said goodbye at the door of the cafe, Veronica suddenly hugged him. "Thank you for coming to see me that day," she said. "I was so lonely with my pain." "Me too," Lawrence replied, hugging her back. "Thank you for not kicking me out of your office." "See you on Sunday," Veronica said, stepping back. "I'll bring all the documents on Wesley, and we can start working on the plan." Lawrence nodded. "See you Sunday." He watched Veronica get into her car and drive away, feeling strangely excited. For the first time in a long time, he had a goal, a plan, something that made him feel alive. And for the first time in a long time, he had an ally, someone who understood his pain and shared his anger. It was an unexpected alliance, born of betrayal and pain. But there was something right about it, something fair. And Lawrence was ready to follow this path to the end, whatever the cost. On the way home, he wondered what other surprises his alliance with Veronica might bring. But one thing he knew for sure: revenge would be sweet. "I see that the search results do not contain any information on our topic. Let me continue writing the next chapter according to the plan." The Christmas holidays passed in a strange atmosphere of pretense. Lawrence played the role of a loving husband and father, smiling, giving gifts, and making the appropriate toasts. Beatrice also tried to maintain the appearance of family bliss, although she left twice to attend to urgent business. The children seemed oblivious to the tension between their parents, absorbed in their own problems. Ethan spent most of his time in his room, coming out only for dinner while Eliza was constantly texting her friends, planning a joint trip to some environmental protest. Lawrence spent New Year's Eve at home with colleagues and neighbors whom Beatrice had invited for a traditional dinner. Wesley Porter was not among the guests, of course. That would have been too much even for Beatrice. Lawrence and Veronica kept in touch by phone throughout the holidays. Their conversations grew longer and more candid. They discussed not only their unfaithful spouses and plans for revenge, but also more personal topics: childhood, dreams, favorite books, and movies. Lawrence found himself looking forward to these conversations, finding Veronica's voice on the phone more comforting than Beatrice's physical presence in their shared home. In mid-January, they were finally able to meet in person. Beatrice had left for 3 days to attend some kind of environmental forum in a neighboring state, and the children, as usual, were absorbed in their own activities and paid no attention to their father. Lawrence invited Veronica to his office after work, when all the employees had already gone home. She arrived right on time, carrying a small briefcase and looking determined. "Are you ready?" she asked instead of greeting him, walking into his office and looking around. "Yes," Lawrence nodded, pointing to a pile of documents on the table. "I've prepared everything you asked for: financial reports, copies of bank statements, insurance policies, mortgages." Veronica sat down in the chair opposite him and opened her briefcase. "I'm ready too. I did a little digging and found out that Wesley has a few skeletons in his closet. It turns out that his appointment to this position wasn't as flawless as the newspapers made it out to be." "What do you mean?" "He got the job thanks to his uncle, who was on the city council, and there are witnesses who claim that Wesley took bribes for allocating more lucrative parking spaces in the city center. Nothing serious, but enough to cause problems if the information falls into the wrong hands." Lawrence whistled. "You know how to dig." "I have to," Veronica shrugged. "In real estate, you can't get anywhere without it. So, let's see what you've got." They spread the documents out on a large conference table and began to study them. Lawrence explained the structure of the family's finances: joint accounts, personal savings, investments. Veronica asked precise, sometimes unexpected questions and made notes in her notebook. "So, the house is registered to both of you?" she asked, looking through the real estate documents. "Yes, joint ownership. We bought it 15 years ago before the business took off. Now it's worth about 3 times as much." "A good investment," Veronica nodded. "What about cars?" "We each have our own. Mine is registered to the company, and Beatrice bought her Toyota 3 years ago. She insisted that the car be registered to her." "Feminism in action," Veronica smiled. "What about the children?" "What about the children? Do they have their own cars, bank accounts?" "They have educational accounts that I opened when they were 5. They'll have access to them when they go to college. They don't have cars yet, but Eliza has already hinted that she'd like one when she graduates from high school." Veronica tapped her pen thoughtfully on the table. "Okay, now let's talk about your business. As I understand it, you and your partner have equal shares." "Yes, Miles and I own the company equally. Everything is transparent and legal." "Does Beatrice have any connection to the company?" "Legally, no. But under state law, she is entitled to half of my share in the event of a divorce." Veronica looked up from the documents. "What if you sell your share before the divorce?" Lawrence thought for a moment. "Theoretically, I could sell it to Miles, but it's complicated. The company is all I have. It's my whole life." "Sometimes you have to sacrifice something for freedom," Veronica said gently. "Think of it as a temporary measure. Sell your share to Miles for a symbolic amount with the option to buy it back in a year or two. Miles won't agree. He's your friend, isn't he? Explain the situation to him. Lawrence shook his head. I'm not sure I'm ready to let him in on this. Then come up with another reason. Tell him you want to try something new, that you're tired of the routine, or that you need the money for a personal project after all. It's only temporary. Lawrence thought about it. The idea was risky, but it made sense. If he sold his share of the business before Beatrice found out about his plans, she wouldn't be able to claim the company. Okay, I'll think about it, he finally said. What's next? Veronica turned the page in her notebook. Next is the house. You said it's jointly owned. What if you decide to move? Buy something nicer? Beatrice is unlikely to agree. She's attached to the neighborhood. What if she's offered something really attractive? A house in a more prestigious neighborhood with a large lot, maybe with solar panels and other eco-features she loves so much? Lawrence chuckled. Maybe that would work. But why? Then, Veronica leaned closer. You could arrange not to buy the house outright, but only an option to buy it. She'll think the house is already yours. Start renovating it, buying furniture, bragging to her friends. And then it turns out that to complete the transaction, she has to pay a large sum within a certain period of time, a sum she won't have because by that time, I'll be gone, and all our joint accounts will be empty, Lawrence finished, beginning to understand the plan. Exactly, Veronica smiled. And for added effect, we can even change the cars. Buy new ones, register them to family members but on credit, which again they'll have to pay off themselves. That's cruel, Lawrence remarked, but there was no condemnation in his voice. No crueler than betrayal and treachery, Veronica parried. And besides, we're not going to kill or maim anyone. We're just going to teach them a lesson, show them that you can't destroy other people's lives with impunity. They continued to discuss the details of the plan. Veronica suggested clever schemes. Lawrence assessed their feasibility and made adjustments. By the end of the evening, they had a rough, step-by-step plan. What about us? Lawrence asked when they finished with the documents and moved on to the bottle of wine he had thoughtfully set aside for the evening. What do you mean? Veronica raised an eyebrow. Where are we going to go after we pull this off? We can't stay in town. I've been thinking about that, Veronica said, taking a sip of wine. I have a small house in Aruba. I bought it 5 years ago as an investment and I rent it out to tourists. We could live there for a while until things settle down. In Aruba? Lawrence laughed sincerely for the first time that evening. Are you serious? Like in a cheap detective novel, escape to a tropical island. What's wrong with that? Veronica smiled too. Sun, sea, no problems. Isn't that what we all dream of? I don't know what I dream of, Lawrence admitted. Until recently, I just existed, without thinking about the future. Work, home, family. Everything went round and round day after day. And now? Now, Lawrence thought for a moment. Now I feel a strange excitement. It's as if I'm young again and can change everything, start with a clean slate. That's right. Veronica covered his hand with hers. We've both been given a chance at a new life. Let's not waste it. Their eyes met, and Lawrence suddenly realized how close this woman had become to him in such a short time. They were bound by a shared pain, a shared secret, a shared plan. But there was something else, a mutual understanding that he had so lacked in his relationship with Beatrice. You're right, he said. Let's do it. Over the next few weeks, Lawrence actively put his plan into action. First, he talked to Miles about selling his share of the business. As Veronica had expected, Miles was shocked. Are you serious? He asked incredulously when Lawrence explained his proposal. Sell your share? After everything we've built together? I'm tired, Miles, Lawrence said, trying to sound as sincere as he could. For the last few years, I felt like a hamster on a wheel. Same office, same problems. I need a change in my life. But selling the business? Why not take a vacation, travel? That won't help. I need something more drastic. Miles rubbed his chin thoughtfully. What are you going to do? I haven't decided yet. Lawrence shrugged. Maybe I'll start my own business, something small. Maybe I'll change careers altogether. What about your family? What does Beatrice say? She supports me, Lawrence lied. She understands that I need a change. I don't even know what to say. Miles shook his head. How much do you want for your share? Lawrence named a figure, about 10 times less than the real value. Miles' eyes widened. Are you kidding? That's a joke. I don't want to take advantage of you, Lawrence smiled. Consider it gratitude for all these years of friendship. But that's not fair to you. Fairness isn't always equality, Miles. I get my freedom, you get control of the company. It's a win-win. After much persuasion and discussion, Miles agreed, albeit reluctantly. They decided to finalize the deal within a month, after the lawyers had prepared all the necessary documents. The second item on the agenda was a new home. Veronica, using her connections in the real estate world, found the perfect place. A large, modern house in a prestigious neighborhood with solar panels, a rainwater collection system, and other eco-friendly features that Beatrice would love. Lawrence showed her photos of the house, pretending to have stumbled across the listing by accident. To his surprise, Beatrice was immediately interested. It looks amazing, she said, looking through the brochure. What neighborhood is it in? Brentwood Estates. You know, where the mayor lives. Really? Beatrice's eyes lit up. That's the greenest neighborhood in town. They even have a farmer's market. Really? I didn't know that, Lawrence lied, even though that was exactly why Veronica had chosen the house. Can we go see it? Sure. I'll talk to the agent. The agent, of course, was Veronica, but she made sure that on the day of the viewing, she was replaced by a colleague, a young woman who had no idea about the complicated scheme she had unwittingly become a part of. The house made a lasting impression on Beatrice. She walked through the spacious rooms, admiring the thoughtful design and eco-friendly solutions. It's perfect, she said to Lawrence when they returned home. Just perfect. Do you think we can afford it? I think so, Lawrence nodded. We'll sell our current house and use some of our savings. Then let's buy it. Beatrice's voice was filled with an enthusiasm that Lawrence hadn't heard in years. Imagine the parties we could throw there. I'll introduce you to my activist friends. They're such interesting people. Lawrence smiled to himself. How easy it was to manipulate Beatrice by playing on her vanity and desire to impress others. I'll contact the agent tomorrow, he promised. The documents for the house were drawn up in a special way. Lawrence made a small down payment and took out an option to purchase in Beatrice's name. Under the terms of the agreement, they could move into the house immediately, but had to pay the full amount within 3 months. The down payment was non-refundable if they decided not to buy. Beatrice signed all the papers without even reading the fine print. The third item on the agenda was cars. Lawrence suggested that Beatrice and the children choose new cars. Why? Beatrice asked in surprise. Our cars are perfectly fine. New house, new cars, Lawrence smiled. Besides, mine is pretty old and your Toyota isn't quite befitting a resident of Brentwood Estates. Beatrice hesitated, but the temptation was too great. What do you suggest? Anything you want. Choose any model you like with the kids and I'll pay for everything. Ethan and Eliza, upon hearing their father's offer, showed interest in him for the first time in a long time. They spent hours browsing car websites, choosing models. Beatrice also joined in, looking for something presentable but environmentally friendly. A week later, the choice was made. Beatrice settled on a new hybrid Lexus. Eliza chose a small electric Fiat, and Ethan ordered the latest model of a sports Mustang. Lawrence arranged the purchase of all three cars, but the trick was that they were bought on credit, which was taken out in the names of Beatrice and the children. The first payments were due in 2 months, just when the plan was supposed to be fully implemented. At the same time, Veronica was working on her part of the plan. She carefully passed information about Wesley Porter's corruption schemes to a local newspaper through a third party. The journalists took an interest in the story and began their own investigation. By mid-March, everything was ready. The new house was already furnished with furniture that Beatrice had chosen with great care. New cars were parked in the garage, and Lawrence's share in the business had been officially sold to Miles. The last and most difficult stage remained: disappearance. "Are you sure you're ready?" Veronica asked when they met for the last time before leaving. They were sitting in a small cafe on the outskirts of town where no one knew them. "Absolutely," Lawrence nodded. "And you?" "A little scared," she admitted. "We're changing our lives completely, leaving everything behind. Do you regret it?" "No," Veronica shook her head firmly. "Not for a minute. Wesley destroyed everything good that was between us. I deserve better. We both do." Lawrence covered her hand with his. "In a week, we'll be in Aruba. Just you and me." Veronica smiled. "Sounds like a dream." On his last night in his old house, Lawrence hardly slept. He lay with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling and listening to Beatrice breathing beside him. By this time tomorrow, he would be on his way to a new life, and she would wake up to find her world had come crashing down around her. He got up earlier than usual, took a shower, shaved, and dressed in a suit as if he were going to the office. Beatrice muttered something in her sleep as he kissed her on the cheek goodbye, a ritual he had followed for years. "I'll be back late tonight," he said, knowing it was a lie. "We have an important meeting with investors." Going down to the kitchen, he drank the last of his coffee from his favorite mug. It was a strange feeling knowing that he would never see these walls, this furniture, these things he had grown accustomed to over the years of living together. But Lawrence felt neither sadness nor regret, only a slight excitement and anticipation. Everything was already prepared. A small bag with the most necessary items was waiting for him in the trunk of his car. He planned to buy the rest in Aruba. All his documents, his passport with an open visa, airline tickets, bank cards for his new accounts, were safely hidden in the inside pocket of his jacket. Before leaving, Lawrence left an envelope on the table. Inside was a short note. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. Don't look for me. It's over. Lawrence." No explanations, no accusations. Let her figure out for herself why he was leaving. Leaving the house, he got into his car and drove slowly down the street. Neighbors were already taking out the trash or walking their dogs, a typical morning in the suburbs. No one paid any attention to Lawrence. No one knew that he was seeing them for the last time. Veronica was waiting for him at the agreed place, in the parking lot of a store on the outskirts of town. She was sitting behind the wheel of an old Ford she had bought especially for this day. She had left her new Audi in the garage of her house with a note for her husband, very similar to the one Lawrence had left. "Ready?" she asked when Lawrence got into the passenger seat. "More than ready," he replied, fastening his seatbelt. "Let's go." They left the city on the highway leading to the airport in the neighboring state. It was safer that way. Less chance of running into anyone they knew. They hardly spoke on the way, each lost in their own thoughts. 3 hours later, they were at the airport. Veronica left the car in long-term parking. A friend would pick it up in a few days. Check-in, passport control, the waiting area. It all passed in a blur. Lawrence felt as if he were watching everything from the sidelines. Reality only hit him on the plane, when the flight attendant offered drinks and American soil disappeared from the window. "We did it," Veronica whispered, squeezing his hand. "We really did." "Yes," Lawrence smiled. Now we just have to keep going. The flight to Aruba with a layover took almost 8 hours. By evening, they were leaving the airport in Oranjestad into the warm tropical air, filled with the smells of the sea and exotic flowers. A taxi took them to a small house on the coast. It was a modest but cozy one-story house with a terrace overlooking the ocean and a garden with palm trees and flowering shrubs. "Welcome to our new home," Veronica said, opening the door. "It's not as luxurious as your mansion in Brunchwood Estates, but at least no one will take it away for non-payment." Lawrence laughed. "I like it. It's peaceful here." They unpacked their few belongings, took a shower, and went out onto the terrace to have dinner. Veronica had asked a neighbor to buy groceries in advance, so the refrigerator was well stocked. Sitting on the terrace with a glass of wine in his hand, watching the sunset over the Caribbean Sea, Lawrence felt a sense of peace for the first time in many years. No anxiety, no tension, no pretense. "What are you thinking about?" Veronica asked, noticing his pensive gaze. "How strange it is," Lawrence replied. "I left everything behind, my home, my business, my family, and yet I feel freer than I've ever felt." "Because it all stopped being yours a long time ago," Veronica said gently. "You were living in a cage you built for yourself, and now you've broken free." The first month in Aruba was like a honeymoon for both of them. They swam in the sea, sunbathed on the beach, explored the island, and got to know the locals. Lawrence started painting, at first just to pass the time, then with real passion. It turned out he had a certain talent for painting, especially watercolors. Veronica also found a hobby. She started writing a book, at first as therapy, then she became seriously absorbed in the process. In the book, she described her experience of overcoming the crisis and starting a new life, although she did not reveal all the details of her and Lawrence's plan for revenge. In the evenings, they sat on the terrace, talked, laughed, and shared their impressions. Their relationship, which began as an alliance against a common enemy, gradually grew into something more. Neither of them rushed things. They both understood that there was no need to hurry. At the end of their second month in Aruba, Veronica suggested checking what was happening in their hometown. She still had trusted contacts who could provide information without risking their location being revealed. "Are you sure you want to know?" Lawrence asked. "Maybe it's better to just leave the past in the past?" "I need to know that our plan worked," Veronica shook her head. "That it wasn't all for nothing." Lawrence agreed, albeit reluctantly. Part of him really wanted to know the consequences of their disappearance, but another part feared that the news might upset the fragile balance they had found on this tropical island. A week later, a reply arrived. Veronica received a long letter from her former colleague, who, unaware of the situation, simply responded to seemingly innocent questions about how things were in the city. They were sitting on the terrace when Veronica read aloud excerpts from the letter. "The only thing people are talking about in town is the scandal with Porter. He was arrested for bribery and financial fraud. They say he's been taking money from parking lot owners in the city center for years. His wife, remember Veronica, has disappeared somewhere. Rumor has it that she ran off with her lover, taking all the money with her. Poor Wesley. What a blow." Veronica paused and looked at Lawrence with a satisfied smile. "Looks like the journalistic investigation I initiated has borne fruit." "Read on," Lawrence encouraged her. "And then there was the scandal with the Frost family. They lived not far from us. The husband owned some kind of parts manufacturing company. Can you imagine he disappeared too, around the same time as Veronica Porter? People are saying they ran away together, although there's no official word on that. His wife, I think her name is Beatrice, was left penniless. They supposedly bought a new house in Brunchwood Estates, but it turned out to be just an option to buy, and when it came time to pay, there was no money in the accounts. Their old house has already been sold to pay off debts, and the new cars they bought were repossessed by the bank because the loans weren't paid. Beatrice now lives in a small apartment on the outskirts and works as a secretary in some office. They say her environmental group turned their backs on her. Apparently, activism was only for rich housewives. Lawrence felt a strange satisfaction. The plan had worked even better than they had expected. It gets better. Veronica turned the page, and their son, I don't remember his name, ended up in prison for drugs. He was caught with some new synthetic drug, and since he already had a record for previous offenses, he got 2 years. His daughter apparently left for California with some guy from her environmental group, but then all contact with her was lost. In short, it's a complete disaster. People say it's divine punishment for Beatrice having an affair with a married man. Veronica put down the letter. Well, I guess you could say we got what we wanted. Lawrence nodded, but without much joy. He hadn't expected Ethan to go to prison or Eliza to just disappear. Of course, they had been on a slippery slope before, but they were still his children. "Do you regret it?" Veronica asked, noticing his expression. "I don't know," Lawrence replied honestly. "Beatrice got what she deserved, but the children, they just got caught up in it all." "They were old enough to make their own choices," Veronica reminded him. "And from what you've told me, they chose their path long before our plan." "You're probably right," Lawrence sighed. "It's just strange to hear about it all so detached, as if it happened to other people." "It did." Veronica stood up and walked over to him. "That was in another life. We have a new one now." She put her arms around his shoulders, and Lawrence felt the tension leave his body. Veronica was right. It really was a different life now. That family, that town, that job, all of it was in the past, which seemed more distant and unreal with each passing day. Months went by. Lawrence and Veronica gradually integrated into the local community. They introduced themselves as a married couple from the United States who had decided to move to Aruba for a quiet life. No one asked any unnecessary questions. Many Americans came here to escape the cold, high taxes, or simply the hustle and bustle of a big country. Lawrence became increasingly interested in painting. He found a local artist who gave him lessons, and he progressed quickly. His watercolors, seascapes, sunsets, local architecture became popular with tourists. A small gallery in Orangestad offered to exhibit several of his works, and to his surprise, Lawrence sold almost everything. Veronica finished her book and found an agent who helped her publish it under a pseudonym. It was a story of recovery from crisis, of finding a new self, of restarting life. The book unexpectedly became popular among middle-aged women going through difficult periods in their lives. Gradually, their relationship moved to a new level. One evening, after a walk on the beach, Lawrence kissed Veronica, a real kiss, not just a friendly kiss on the cheek, which they were used to. She responded with unexpected passion, and that night they found themselves in bed together for the first time. "Funny," said Veronica, lying in his arms. "Our exes cheated on us with each other, and now we're together." "A poetic plot twist," Lawrence smiled. "Except unlike them, we're not cheating on anyone." On the anniversary of their arrival in Aruba, they decided to celebrate the beginning of their new life. They had a small dinner on the terrace, inviting a few friends they had made during their time there. When the guests left, they stayed behind, sipping wine and looking at the stars. "Are you happy?" Veronica asked. Lawrence thought about it. A year ago, he was a successful businessman with a beautiful home, a prestigious job, and a wealthy family. Now, he lived in a modest house on a tropical island, sold watercolors to tourists, and was dating a woman he had known for just over a year. And yet, for the first time in many years, I can honestly say that, yes, I am happy, he replied. I'm no longer pretending, playing a role, trying to live up to someone else's expectations. I'm just living, and it's liberating. Veronica smiled. I'm glad. Because I'm happy too. Who would have thought that we would have to go through betrayal, revenge, and escape to finally find real life? Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what's really important, Lawrence remarked philosophically. And you don't regret it at all? Veronica looked at him intently. The children, the business, everything you left behind. Do I regret it? Lawrence thought for a moment. Sometimes I wonder how the children are doing, but I can't say I miss that life. It had long been an empty shell, a facade with no substance. Here I have far fewer possessions, but far more life. They sat on the terrace until late at night, talking about the future, about plans, about dreams. Veronica wanted to write another book. Lawrence thought about opening his own small gallery. At night, as they lay in bed, Lawrence suddenly thought about how strange the paths of fate are that lead us to where we are meant to be. If it hadn't been for Beatrice's betrayal, if it hadn't been for Dexter's careless remark at the Christmas party, if he hadn't decided to go to Veronica, he could still be living that empty life, pretending to be happy, playing the role of a successful businessman with a perfect family. Instead, he had found real life, real feelings, and perhaps real love. And although the path to it had been winding and painful, the result was worth every minute of suffering. Falling asleep to the sound of waves coming through the open window, Lawrence felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever his motives for running away, however cruel his plan for revenge, it had ultimately led to something good, something real. And that, in the end, was the best revenge. Not just destroying the lives of those who betrayed you, but building a new, better life for yourself. A life full of color, peace, and genuine emotions. A life with no room for falsehood and pretense. A life truly worth living.